Now that our texture file is cropped and resized to be 4K, it's a 4096 by 4096 image, it's time to check to see how well it's going to tile. Tile meaning when it's repeated next to itself, will you see a harsh or a kind of a flat edge there where there's no transition. So to check that, I'm going to go up here to Filter, Other, Offset, and I'm just going to play with these sliders until we see some hard edges showing up. And immediately that vertical one is standing out to me as very, very hard. To zoom in, I'm holding down Control on a Windows computer and pressing plus or minus on the keyboard. On a Mac, it's going to be holding down Command and then also pressing plus or minus to zoom in. If you want to fill the screen with the image, if you hold down Control and 0, it will fill the screen. On a Mac, that's going to be Command 0. So I want to really look at the image and get close to it, because now I can see, now that I'm closer, I can see that horizontal, here's our vertical split, our horizontal split here. So that's okay, we just want to see it, we want to visualize it in the middle, and now it's time to blend this. There's going to be lots of different tools we can use. I want to talk about a few main ones. And we're going to work in a pretty destructive way, which is meaning it's going to be hard to go back. But for the sake of what we're doing today, it's going to be kind of a fast and loose way to do it. So first thing I want to show you is the clone stamp tool. It's sort of the tried and true classic tool in Photoshop. Now before we start to paint with it, we need to select a clone source. If we hold down Alt, goes for Mac and PC. If we hold down Alt, we can see our cursor changes from a paintbrush or just the regular circle to this plus sign with a little crosshair sort of thing. So we need to select a region that we want to source. And I'm going to do this in an area where it's going to be really obvious. I'm going to click over here on one of these stripes. And now you can see inside of my cursor, if I make that bigger, we can see those going to be repeated. So whatever I paint is going to just copy that. It's the clone stamp. So when we're fixing these edges, we want to try to pick areas that have less distinct features to them. So I'm going to come in here at the top. I'm going to zoom in, holding down Control and pressing plus. Holding down spacebar and clicking will let you pan around like this. The other way you can navigate is if you go up here to the navigator, and you can drag this around. To make my brush bigger or smaller, you can come up here and click, change the size, change the hardness. We'll talk about this. You can also change the size by right-clicking, making that bigger, making it smaller. The hardness is how harsh of an edge you're going to have when you paint. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to start painting. We can see, if I zoom in some more, it's leaving a hard edge. Okay, it's somewhat blendy, but it's still got a hard edge there. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to hit Control Z a few times. And now I'm going to change that. I want some soft brush edge. So I don't want it to be completely soft necessarily, but I'm going to go somewhere in the middle here. The other thing I'm going to change is my flow. If I have it at 100% flow, it's going to just copy pixel to pixel what's there. If I bring it down to something more gentle, we're going to be able to layer up with every stroke. So sometimes a helpful way to have a more natural look when you're blending or painting out some features. So I'm switching the side of my reference or switching the position of my reference every so often. As I go down, I'm holding down Alt, clicking, painting, holding down Alt, clicking, painting. There's some areas where, we have this hard split with this feature here that I'm not sure painting out is really believable, if it's really working. So we'll see if there's maybe another tool we can use as we come down here where we've got this intersection. So I'm just painting kind of the neighbors, using them as a reference to paint that seam. And if we look back at our work, it's okay. I think for as quick as we're trying to move, I think it's going to work. When we come in here in this intersection, I think it's going to be a little tricky to try to get those to blend. You could really work that. Maybe that actually is okay. It just depends on what your texture features include. So that's the clone stamp tool. We're almost down here at the bottom using the clone stamp tool. When I say the bottom, I mean the intersection between the two splits, vertical and horizontal. So let's try another tool. Over here at the patch tool, you can see from the animation, you're going to draw a contour around the area you want to try to remove, and then pull it to an area you want to source, and Photoshop will do its best to blend inside of that region. So I'm going to pan over here, holding down spacebar, clicking and dragging, and I'm going to change this region from hard edge to hopefully something a little smoother. And I'm clicking and dragging, drawing a lasso around it. And now I'm going to drag inside of this window, and you can see that patch is going to source wherever we ask it to. So something that's kind of similar, or we could try something very different, but let's shoot for something similar here. So Photoshop's going to do its best to blend, but I think that didn't work too well. Maybe we're trying to do too much at once. So I'm going to go Control Z a few times. I'm going to try to select a smaller source. Okay, I think that's working a little better now. So just smaller pieces at a time. Maybe trying to pick some areas that have a similar contrast. Sometimes you will get these little artifacts where you get these kind of bright spots. It's not a dissimilar concept from Clone Stamp. It's just a kind of a different technique. Okay. I think this side's looking okay. It's not maybe as clean as and controlled as the Clone Stamp was able to achieve. But let's move on and talk about another technique. The spot healing brush is a newer tool in Photoshop. By new, I mean maybe the last 10 years. It's not that new. But it works a lot like just painting, except Photoshop's going to determine kind of what around it is your paint palette. So it's sort of like Clone Stamp, but instead Photoshop's deciding for you what that clone source is, and it's going to really try to blend stuff. So let's see if we can paint this edge. Okay, it's really starting to look blurry to me. I think this is such kind of a crispy, crunchy, textury image that maybe this isn't the best candidate for it. Now, is it our brush hardness? It could be. Let's make that a very hard brush. Still looking very blurry. I think the grain and the kind of, the crust of this image just is really going to keep it from being a good candidate for this. I find the spot healing brush is good for softer things because it does tend to blur things out. You know, great for like faces if you're trying to do that kind of thing. But if we just kind of see what it does, it really does leave like a trail of blur. So I want to show you one more tool, and it's not in this palette over here. It's actually a newer tool called Content Aware Fill, and I'll show you where it is up in Edit. Content Aware Fill. It's grayed out right now. Why is that? Photoshop needs to first know which region we want to Content Aware Fill. So I'm going to take this rectangular marquee box. If you have some other shape selected, that's fine. But for what we're trying to do here, I think the rectangle is going to be the most efficient. And I'm going to draw a box around here. You could also use the freeform lasso tool. But, you know, my hands aren't that steady, so I think I'm missing some of that seam. So again, the rectangular marquee tool. And then I'm going to go to Edit, Content Aware Fill. And we do get a preview here. We can zoom in and see what Photoshop's going to try to do to blend that transition. I think it looks okay. Let's see how it goes. Wow, not bad. So let's maybe clean up some of the stuff we missed. Content Aware Fill. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit, see if we can do this all in one go. See if we're flying too close to the sun here. Okay, now this is a good example of when it does sort of not do so well. So you can see this kind of jagged edge. I think Photoshop just doesn't know what to do here. See if we can just isolate it, if it will work any better. Maybe a little bit. Trying to take the whole thing at once maybe was too much. So breaking it out into smaller bits could be a good idea. You can see it does kind of sometimes do this repeating situation, just like we might do with clone stamping. You know, we could have this same shape seen many, many times, and that's not necessarily what you want. So if that's bothering you, you can come back and paint that out. Obviously, don't continue to exacerbate that problem. Okay, so how do we test to see if our tiling work is done, if it turned out well? Well, we can go back up to Filter, Other, Offset, and now you can play with these sliders and see, do you have any edges that look not like a really natural transition? And I can see one, and it was maybe one of the last areas we touched. And I think that has to do with just where this sort of blob situates itself around this region. So we can try something with the clone stamp. We can try to continue to paint this out and maybe just like extend it past, not give it such a hard edge. I'm going to try to show you one more clone stamp technique. If we go to Window, Clone Source, and I'm going to move this over to where we're working. And we can actually change some of the features with clone stamp kind of on the fly. We can rotate this, we can scale it, we could flip it horizontally. So if we hold over this little icon here, it says flip horizontal. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click up here as our beginning of our source, and I'm going to paint. And you can see that plus sign as I click and hold the cursor. That is our clone source, and it is mirrored from where we are now. So is this going to be the most realistic? Probably not. But maybe we can kind of come in here, and I'm going to turn off that mirror now, and maybe we can kind of paint out some of the perfect bits that maybe are making it less realistic. I'm going to look at everything again. I can go ahead and close that clone source now. And now I'm going to go to Filter, Other, Offset. And let's play with these sliders again and see if things look better. We're just looking for harsh seams at this point. If you want to zoom in and really scrutinize, now's the chance. But I think that looks pretty good. For such a kind of high contrast texture, I feel like it looks pretty good. It's got really distinct features that cross and move in very, very particular ways. But it looks like it's going to tile, at least as far as blended edges, it's going to look pretty good. So let's hit OK. And we're going to save this. File, save as. And I'm going to go and find a new folder, my textures folder. I'm going to go to the terrain folder, and I've already made one, but you want to make something called tile terrain textures. Okay, and I want to save this as a PNG. We're going to go to save. In this case, I'm going to replace this same file. And it's going to ask me, do I want to save it as a large file, medium file, small file? Large file is fine for now. If you're having hard drive space, you could try one of these other methods, but you can see here it will take longer to save it as a small file. I'm going to click OK. And that's pretty much the process to tiling or preparing your texture file to tile with blended edges.